Welcome in to Check the Mic again. Sam Monson here, flying solo once more. No Steve Palazzolo, but another very special guest joins us for the show today. The great Matt Harmon of Yahoo and Reception Perception. How's it going, Matt?
Sam, good to be with you, man. Yeah, it's funny. Steve was going back and forth with me prior to the draft, really trying to get a show on the books. Unfortunately, due to me, by the way. I was the problematic one. I was not able to get something on the schedule. So then you hit me up. You're like, well, Steve's not here. I'm like, well, okay, that's perfect. Then as soon as Steve's gone, yeah, then I'll show up. So I might have to do some, fence mending, some relationship fixing with Steve on the back end. But I am excited to talk with you today.
The number of people that immediately become available as soon as I tell them Steve's not going to be there it's
tough look. It's a tough look.
Anyway, this is all presented by FanDuel as always, and it's coming live, at least on this side of it, from the Antonio Cromartie studio in part with Huggies, as long-term listeners and our billionaire will be well aware. Matt, for people that don't know you, don't know your work, I think you're most kind of well-known for Reception Perception. Why don't you give us the little elevator pitch for what exactly that is, what your methodology is, and why people should be paying attention to it?
Sure. So Reception Perception, as you mentioned, is the methodology that I came up with 12 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. 12, 13 years ago. First article was actually posted just about a month away from the 12-year anniversary. So I've been kind of working on the back end for about 13 years now on charting wide receivers. And what I do is over an 8-game sample for NFL players and college prospects, I go in and chart every single route that they run in that 8-game sample, every snap that they take, how often are they lining up in the slot, outside, off the ball, on the ball, which I've become more and more obsessed with from an alignment standpoint as the league has shifted, as the meta of the league and like the positional archetypes of the league have changed, become more fixated on that part of the process. So do that for an 8-game sample for NFL players. And really the idea is can we isolate these wide receivers from surrounding variables? Because you know this, of course, Sam, all of your great listeners and viewers know this because they're ball knowers. Wide receiver production is so inherently dependent on outside variables. Even, the good stats like first downs per route run, yards per route run, which are good wide receiver stats, you still need things to go right to accumulate those yards. Like they're not truly player isolating. So I think that the one thing a wide receiver can control on a down-to-down basis for the most part. Obviously, nothing is perfect when you're coming to isolate players, and you know this working at PFF for so many years. Nothing is perfect when it comes to isolating players in football because everything is kind of interdependent. But I think the one thing they can control is how often they run good routes, how often they can get open against man press coverage, how often they can beat zone coverage. There's other metrics in reception perception as well, whether it comes to contested catch rate, working with the ball in space. So really the kind of goal is, again, to isolate those wide receivers, really get a good sense of just how good they are in just an individual standpoint, but also how can we sort the wide receiver position into these different archetypes. I think that's something, again, I've become more obsessed with as the time has gone on is, comparing one wide receiver to another, just to use a really exaggerated example, like back in the day with the Patriots, like what Randy Moss was doing was so different than what Wes Welker is doing. So that's something I think reception perception is really valuable for as well.
I feel that every time we get to the draft, it's sort of, in a way, it frustrates me. But in a way, it's just the reality of it. Like all these guys we talk about as wide receivers and they get ranked in wide receiver rankings, but we're effectively talking about at least 2, probably 3 or more completely different positions. Like, it's insane trying to rank a guy like Randy Moss versus a Wes Welker. I mean, they do not play the same position, even though they are both called wide receivers. Like it just feels ridiculous as an exercise that these guys are put in the same list of rankings as if they do the same thing.
100%. And, then you get into the NFL. I mean, a guy we might talk about today, year 2 wide receivers, Emeka Egbuka, he's playing a lot of like X receiver as a rookie when he didn't do that really at all at Ohio State. And, it's kind of like not how I evaluated him. Certainly I evaluated him more as kind of that big slot receiver. And maybe I think he could play outside based on his college charting, but, mostly as a Z receiver, which it sounds like he's going to do more this year. So again, like I think these guys can not be set up to fail, but not be used to their maximum capacity when they can't get into that exact right position. And then sometimes you see a guy get into a spot that makes more sense and they really take off. I mean, Drake London is another great example that like he has the body type and I think the skill set from a separation standpoint, like how he gets off of press coverage to be a really good quality starting X receiver in the NFL. He was that in his first 2 years in Arthur Smith's offense playing as that X receiver, but then he goes into year 3 and year 4 in Zach Robinson's offense. Again, some connective tissue here because now he's currently the Bucs offensive coordinator and he's, off ball more, he's playing more in the slot and then he really, really takes off from a production standpoint. So yeah, it's getting into the weeds a little bit. And I totally agree when it comes to the draft process, this stuff really, really matters. Once we get their landing spots, it's easier to tell like, hey, this guy was probably going to be used in more of an optimal format than you might have imagined. So it really does matter when we're trying to project these wide receivers for success.
What trends have you sort of noticed over the last decade plus of doing this and charting and kind of analyzing the whole thing? And how many archetypes do you think there are now? Because I think, back in the Wes Welker days and after that, it became this sort of, are you a slot only receiver or can you do more? Now, to me, the line is more, can you play X or not? Right. And it's almost 2 buckets. You can either play X on the outsides, man-to-man ISO routes against aggressive press coverage, or you can't. Right. And if you can't, that's fine. But there's no longer such a thing as like a slot only guy. The slot only guy can also be the Z and he can't play X, right? To me, it's almost like the 2 different delineations. Now there's different types of guys that can't play X, but effectively to me, that's the important line. It's like, can you do that or not? And those are almost my 2 buckets. And then within the second bucket, we can have a variety of different players. How many kind of archetypes do you see that are important distinctions?
Yeah, that's a really good kind of way of framing it is you start the discussion with, can this guy be an X receiver? And sometimes guys can be X receivers and I've started calling them sacrificial X receivers, whereas like they can play a lot, right? But they're not necessarily going to, and I think this kind of, this probably started, I think with like the first time I started thinking about this was like 2016, 2017 with the Minnesota Vikings, where they had Steph Diggs and they had Adam Thielen, who were kind of like a Z and big slot. And then they would have just the X receiver for that offense be like a sacrificial player. I think it might've been like Laquan Treadwell for a minute there and, different players like that's like, okay, we typically that X is like your number 1 read in the progression back in the day. Like that's where you would put your number 1 wideout. But because of the way coverages were then, and things have changed a little bit now with just the rise of more split safety coverages and more zones and things of that nature, like you do kind of need your X to be doing a little bit of something different than you would back then. But again, point being that like that player, you almost wanted to just sacrifice your best, your third receiver to those press coverage corners, like get your guy moving off the ball. Like if you're going to have, just because of the rules of the sport, if you're going to have the, fun, hey, move around stuff where this guy's in motion at the snap or he's detached from the formation or we're condensing 2 guys in a sack, because of the rules of the sport, like somebody still has to line up outside and on the line of scrimmage. Like, yeah, why not sacrifice just 1 player to that while we do more of the fun move around stuff with you? To your point, like the guys who are either slot, I would say like slot heavy players versus slot only players. Now there are certain guys who end up becoming slot only based on alignment that personally I think they could do more. Like Jaden Reed is a guy that has kind of fallen into this bucket where he doesn't really play in 2 receiver sets. I think he has the skill set to do more than that. Like I think he could be a Z in 2 receiver sets, but he just really hasn't been to this point. So there is a little bit of like, when we talk about slot only, are we talking skill set or are we talking usage? So like, honestly, we could go for days splitting in these archetypes and things like that. But I think the trend that I've noticed more and more is like that traditional slot option, the Josh Downses of the world. And I think Josh Downs is a fantastic player, a guy I'm super, super high on, both entering the league and what he's shown so far. And I think he can actually have a really good year this year. But when I kind of talk about those guys, like the typical smaller, maybe Downs isn't a good example of this because he does beat man coverage, but like the zone beating small slot receivers, like the Jamison Crowders of the world, those guys just really aren't that important in today's NFL. Maybe things will come back around as defenses get bigger and heavier in the nickel. But right now, because of that, like we're trying to get bigger bodies into the slot. We're trying to get the Cooper Kupps, the Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's not the biggest slot receiver, but he's definitely bigger than those like Jamison Crowder types. So that's probably the trend that has changed more and more, is these guys that were traditional outside players kicking in and being bigger slot options. And I certainly think every year in the NFL draft process, I'm looking out for like, who is that next guy that could be in that mold?
That's the thing. It feels like the NFL sort of realized that being in the slot is an advantage just across the board. Like those guys had an inbuilt boost because you can't press them really. They have this benefit of the two-way go. They can work in all this space and between the hashes when boundary corners theoretically can use the sideline, that old cliche.
Yeah.
So it's just easier, right? So you can move your number one wide receiver into the slot. You can move these X or Z receivers into the slot. And so we sort of lost the reason to be a slot only receiver, right? It's like, well, we could have this guy, but any receiver can do what he can do and also do so much more. So it's like we've just put X and Z receivers into the slot, and then we no longer need this kind of slot specialist option, because by definition, if we're taking a good receiver and moving him into the slot, well, that guy can also be the Z or the X in two wide receiver sets. There's just like the Wes Welkers have died out because we've realized that if we just put a Cooper Kupp in the slot, we get the same benefit of a Wes Welker without the limitations potentially of, well, what if we go to a two wide receiver set? Can he play outside? Like now all of these guys effectively can play outside because, they're inherently, we're looking for a different skill set before we even get to the field.
Yeah, not to mention we're really blurring the lines too. And I've had a little bit of like an existential crisis about this the last 2 years, as this has become, more and more prevalent, but we're kind of blurring the lines with like what's an outside, what's a slot receiver versus with all these like condensed formations, like how close is that outside on ball receiver? The X receiver in Kyle Shanahan's offense is very different than the X receiver in like some of these 2015 offenses where he's all the way. I would think about even like a more recent example, like Ryan Grubb in his 1 year with Seattle. Like DK Metcalf was the outside on ball receiver in that offense, and he's like out there on the boundary essentially. Whereas this year, Jackson Smith-Njigba was the X receiver nominally for most of his snaps in Clint Kubiak's offense, and he's way tighter to the offensive line. And he just gives him essentially like the space you were talking about. It's not exactly a perfect analogy, but it essentially mimics like the two-way go that the slot receiver would get, where JSN was great. I mean, great at this. Obviously, he won the Offensive Player of the Year, even though they can't spell it right on his trophy, which is quite disrespectful. But he won the Offensive Player of the Year, so everybody knows he's great. But the thing he was probably the best player in the NFL at last year was just being a liar as a route runner, selling one thing and then doing another, especially in that intermediate area. Like I can sell, I'm going out, and then I can snap back inside and vice versa. And that space from these condensed formations really changes a lot. And JSN was a guy who was a slot only player in his first couple of years and back in college, but then was, that outside on ball player last year. And a big part of that one is he's awesome and was always capable, I think, of playing more on the perimeter, but those condensed formations allow for that as well. And just one last point to something you mentioned about like getting guys in the slot. I would say another great example of this is like in Ben Johnson's offense. I still feel like, and I'm talking about not so much in Detroit, like what we saw last year in Chicago, his first year, like where the buck stops with him, he's running the entire show. I still feel like I see a lot of people in the media space being like, okay, this guy's the slot and this guy's the X. I'm like, man, if you go back and look at that, especially Odunze versus Burden, both those guys are getting reps in the slot off the ball. I mean, except when Odunze kind of came back in the playoffs and he was, coming back from the injury. Then he was more like pure X, and you got to wonder if that's a little bit of a sacrificial thing for a player who missed so much time. But at the beginning of the year, like, he's moving around with the formation a ton. And then you get Luther Burden, who's off ball and everything. So, like, that's the way to do it right now as a coordinator, is how can we get everybody about 30 to 40 snaps in the slot, as opposed to one guy is our X, one guy is our slot, and kind of traditional archetypes in that way.
I love that you mentioned JSN being, effectively a storyteller with his routes, because one of the things I want to talk about some of the rookies first before we get into these year two guys. One of the things that I thought watching Mekhi Lemon's tape, and he was a fascinating prospect because it it felt a lot like the Ibuka conversation from a year ago, where everyone kind of saw him the same. It was just a case of how valuable you think that is, right?
Mhm.
And there was a very like tight band of evaluations where some receivers, they're all over the place. It's like, this guy is elite. He can be X. He can be a number one receiver, and the sky's the limit. And then other people are like, nah, I don't see any of that. He's like a second round guy. He's not capable of doing any of that stuff. With Ibuka and with Mekhi Lemon, it was like pretty much everybody saw the same stuff. It was just quantifying how valuable you think that is at an NFL level. For Mekhi Lemon, one of the things I thought from watching his tape is that he was the best storyteller in his routes of anybody in this draft. And it wasn't to a confusing degree, because I was watching so many of his routes, and no matter what he sold, the corner bought it every single time, right? Even when I couldn't work out why. Like, it didn't look particularly sophisticated or nuanced or like, really kind of clever. It was just, he would throw the guy a step and the guy would go for that step, and then he just breaks somewhere else. It was like, I've never seen anybody who was such a successful salesman with seemingly no real reason behind it. Like, it was, I was confused with how well it worked. Did you see a lot of that same stuff? And if so, like, how good do you think he can be at the NFL level with this sort of, undersized, potentially slot only profile?
Yeah, to your point at the very beginning there about just kind of how you saw Mekhi Lemon, I think we all agreed on what the skill set was and everything. It was just how much you value that. I kind of said this about this draft class at the very beginning, even back at the combine when I just started working on the prospects. It was like, we're going to get a lot of preferential based debates with this wide receiver class, because this is probably true of every year now because of how many different archetypes are available, but was so many different flavors for these rookies in this class. And his particular flavor, I think, just matters more and is more valuable right now than it was 10 years ago. And, I got in kind of, wouldn't call it a debate, but like discussion with Nate Tice on Football 301 on our show about Mekhi Lemon specifically. Like, to me, I think that if you were docking him a lot because of kind of the profile, I think you're kind of still stuck on dogma that really mattered. Even like 5 years ago, more so than how much of it matters now, because of what we can do for these guys that are a little bit undersized. Like, I don't know if he was quite as good as JSN as a prospect, but I would certainly put him in like the group that I had from a tier perspective with Emeka Ibuka. Like, they were very close in my stacked rankings. And, like, there's been guys since the 2021 season, first round prospects that I've charted with over 68% of their snaps in the slot. There's definitely JSN is there, Emeka Ibuka is there, Mekhi Lemon's there. And then there's like Kadarius Toney and Traylon Burks. And like, I can tell you right now, like, which of those two did not fit in terms like, I think they can hang on the outside in the NFL. I do think Mekhi Lemon can hang on the outside as a Z receiver in two receiver sets in the NFL, and we can get him in these condensed formations to win, because I agree with your notes about him as a salesman. Like, that's why a guy that doesn't have that elite speed in a straight line or whatever certainly can make explosive plays, like we saw with JSN last year, who was like a 4 or 5 guy, maybe in the 40, based on what he ran at his pro day back in the day. And I think Lemon's probably in the same bucket. So yeah, I have pretty good confidence that he can make big plays in the NFL. He can be that guy that wins in the intermediate area. Like, are you going to ask him to win on a go route as the X receiver against press man coverage? No, I don't know why you would ask him to do that. It's like the one thing he really can't do. So find a way to get him into the right alignments and get him to these explosive plays. And I do theoretically, again, we're kind of dealing in theory of what we imagine Sean Mannion's offense is going to look like. Hopefully it's just not another iteration of the same offense they've run in Philadelphia for the last 4 or 5 years. I do think theoretically, like, Mekhi Lemon fits in that.
I'm almost having like a kind of live epiphany on changing my opinion on the value of these guys as we go through this. Cause I was pretty low on Ibuka last year compared with a lot of people because of, the limitations, right? Like, he can't, I don't think he can really play X at a high level, and therefore, but actually, if you view the whole thing in this kind of binary bucket of, can you play X, yes or no? The only way it's a problem if you can't play X is if you already have somebody or multiple people on the team who fit into that bucket as well. Like, if you just don't have anybody that can play X, because I think like Amon-Ra St. Brown and people like that, you can build a whole offense around a guy that can't play X effectively
Yeah.
and still get him as productive as any receiver in the NFL. The only problem is if you already have an Amon-Ra St. Brown on the roster and then you draft another one of those guys who can't play X, and now you're like, well, okay, now what do we do, right? Now the Lions have Jameson Williams, whatever. I'm not using them as the example necessarily, but like if you were drafting an Ibuka or a Mekhi Lemon to a team that already had, one or two of these guys that the offense is sort of constructed around, and none of these guys can play X, then it might be a value problem. But if you're just looking at these guys in isolation saying, well, the problem here is he can't play outside against press coverage. It's like, yeah, but who cares? Like, we just don't do that.
Figure it out. Yeah, you can figure it out. The problem is, though, I mean, you could make an argument that, hey, we keep coming back to Ibuka. You could make an argument that the Bucs already had that guy in Chris Godwin. Now, he was obviously coming off of major injury, but they had Mike Evans, and at the beginning of the year, Emeka Ibuka was awesome, but then Mike Evans gets hurt. And then he also got hurt too. I think that's a big part of kind of his slide, and Baker Mayfield was injured. There was just a lot of chaos in Tampa Bay last year, but I don't think he played as well in the back half of the year in addition to the injury, but Emeka Ibuka too, because he then had to slide into that X receiver position. So again, it does it's one of those, I think he's a perfect sort of test case for what you do and don't want to do with this archetype of player. Now, like another rookie, Carnell Tate, this is why I ended up having him as
next.
Right. I wanted to, it's a good transition because I had him as the number one receiver in the class over Mekhi Lemon because like he fits all 32 NFL offenses. Same thing with, if we're talking about the second year players, Tetero McMillan was my number one over Emeka. The Travis Hunter like wild card, I had him ranked ahead, but obviously that was like a whole sort of separate thing. But between Ibuka and Tetero McMillan, I broke the tie for McMillan because you could play X on all 32 NFL offenses. Now, I don't think that either Tate or McMillan should only be an X. As a matter of fact, I think you could make a case that like these guys should move around the formation more. But yeah, Tate fits all 32 NFL offenses, whether you're living in this like condensed world or you're kind of more spread and shred, which I'm again guessing, I'm speculating, but I think in Tennessee this year, he probably will end up being in more of a spread and shred type offense.
But I do think that still remains like this value separator, particularly when you're talking draft. And it's like the difference between just being a first round player and like, can you go in the top 10? Can you be drafted 4 overall? And Tate is a great example of that because I think there were, unlike Lemon, or Ibuka, where everyone basically saw the same thing and saw exactly the same player and how that was going to be deployed. I think there is a split in how people view Carnell Tate. And there are people that are like, I don't think that guy can be the number one outside receiver in an offense. He's going to be, this number 2 receiver. And he's good at that, but that's all he is, right? Which effectively puts him in the same bucket as Mekhi Lemon or, some of these other Ibuka and those types of players. Do you think that he can be that number 1, X receiver that can do everything in the formation? And as you say, you should, anybody that falls into that bucket, like we shouldn't be in a world anymore where elite receivers of any capacity only play X, they should, by definition, they should be getting moved around and, put into those easier opportunities to have more production. So do you think that he can be that guy, or is he this high end number 2, whatever that actually is, and that's his ceiling?
Yeah, I've said a lot over the last few years, and admittedly, like Marvin Harrison Jr. and what's happened with him has been like a big discussion point about this.
Get onto that.
You can't just play your number 1 receiver as the X all the time. If you do, you're either telling us something about you, the play caller, or what you think of that player. And again, that's where you get into sort of the tough discussion with that. But yeah, you can't have your number 1 guy at this point in the NFL be like 80% outside on the line of scrimmage. If you want to talk about like a more veteran-based example, that's essentially what A.J. Brown was for the Philadelphia Eagles last year, which is like, it's kind of hard to evaluate what he's going to be going forward because of that. So again, just that's a longer sort of tangent there on multiple other players. But yeah, with Carnell Tate, I don't think he needs to or should be like a pure X player, but I think he can hang in that role. I wouldn't put him in the same tier of some of like the guys we've talked about so far that are like the tier, like Marvin Harrison Jr. is a great example. I wouldn't have said, now obviously Marv's been hit or miss in the NFL, but like there's a teardrop. Yeah, there's a teardrop from like that level of prospect to Carnell Tate, in my opinion, and all the guys we're talking about in this year's class as well. And honestly, same thing with like Tedero, McMillan, and Emeka Ibuka last year. I didn't have them as that like tier 1 receiver prospect, Malik Neighbors, tier 1 receiver prospect, but a guy that you could definitely take in the first round of any draft. And the Titans took him 4th overall in this year's draft because I think it was like, well, we got to help out our quarterback. And it's funny, like the whole debate about should we take Jeremiah Love to help our quarterback? Then they do take somebody to help their quarterback. It's like, well, not like that. Not that guy. Actually, I think this makes a lot of sense to just take somebody who can incredibly beat man coverage, 7th best success rate versus man that I've charted since 2021. Like he definitely knows how to win on the vertical stem. I think he can be more maximized by moving around the formation. Elite hands. I mean, doesn't drop the football, did not drop the football at all last year's. Obviously not in the game's charted for reception perception either. Best contested catch rate in this class as well. I mean, he is like he's the most aesthetically pleasing player I've watched as a prospect catching the football because it's just always perfect technique, arms extended, always away from the frame. Like he just has a perfect attack plan for that. So yeah, I'm really excited about him in Tennessee. We'll see, like obviously what the offense looks like, what Cam Ward looks like, but yeah, certainly I think he is somebody that can survive on the outside, be that, be the number 1 for your team. Is he the number 1 for every NFL offense? I don't know about that, but I mean, there have been guys that have come out of Ohio State that were complementary players, and I certainly think Chris Olave is a number 1 receiver. I think Garrett Wilson's a number 1 receiver. Like all these guys have ended up becoming number 1s, in my opinion, at least. Obviously JSN, even though they were complimentary players at Ohio State in college.
Did you have a good comp for Carnell Tate? Because I kept coming back to this. He really reminds me of like a supersized Devontae Smith. Like if you just pack 25 pounds of muscle onto Devontae Smith, you get Carnell Tate.
Yeah, I said he was like a blend of Calvin Ridley as a route runner, but then George Pickens at the catch point, where he was like which is a pretty cool player, by the way, like, I mean, and I'm not talking about Calvin Ridley, like current version Calvin Ridley. I know Titans fans like, wait a second, we already not the guy you have at home, the guy that was in the Atlanta Falcons offense before, obviously his career kind of took a year off and the whole deal like that. So yeah, I think that he's just Ridley to me. When he was kind of on that come up in Atlanta, he was a plus route runner, could win at all 3 levels. And then, again, the way he attacks the football consistently at the catch point, I wouldn't even say Pickens is this like consistent in terms of his attack plan at the football. But again, just like that contested ball winner, he certainly brings that to the table.
A couple more rookies I wanted to run through before we hit the year 2 guys. What did you make of Jordan Tyson? Because he was, I think, a pretty polarizing prospect, and his kind of pre-draft process, like the hype on him was all over the place. Mm-hmm. He was interesting as a route runner to me because, a lot of people said that he was this elite separator and sort of put him in that Mekhi Lemon bucket of an amazing storyteller with his routes. And I understand why, but to me, it almost felt more performative than like Mekhi Lemon. Everything he did was with a reason, right? I'm going to sell you inside. I'm going to move outside and I'll be open. With Tyson, it was like the quick twitch and just sort of special athleticism that he brings to the table. It was almost like he was trying to manufacture as much explosive separation as possible, but like without necessarily, timing the separation to be at the point you want it in the route so that the ball arrives.
So funny. I don't think we've talked about Tyson at all through the process, but that's like exactly what I thought about him too, is that I think the public sometimes can mistake that elite twitch and like all that movement with great route running. But that stuff can be really easily foiled when you get into one-on-one press coverage situations with a really good cornerback. And there's no question like Tyson has the fluidity and like the body control to be a great route runner and a great separator. But yeah, I love the way you described it as a little bit performative. Like this is not made for TikTok. We're trying to get open at the NFL level. You know what I'm saying? And like that's just not quite there. He doesn't have that tempo as a route runner just yet. Where everything is within the rhythm of the play. I think Amari Cooper was guilty of this at times in the NFL, where it's like you line up his 10 best routes, like, oh my God, it's the best route runner in the NFL. But then like he would kind of wane throughout games because it would be a little bit. And then Jerry Jeudy's like the really exaggerated version of this. I think that Jordan Tyson is closer. Like Amari Cooper is actually my player comp for him, which like if you get Amari Cooper, and by the way, I'm actually much higher on Tyson now that he's landed in New Orleans because of the structure of that offense. I think it will be perfect for him. Kellen Moore actually coached Amari Cooper for many, many years. So there's something there in Dallas. But I think when you look at his reception perception profile, Jordan Tyson, you kind of get a good glimpse of sort of what we're talking about here, where he's a 30th percentile success rate versus press player. Like, I think that when you get up and like physically press him, all those like moves that are just not sequenced together, he doesn't really have a plan there. But he was the best, not just the best zone beater in this class. He's one of the best zone beaters of the last like 5 classes, because when he's kind of free and, you know, can just like put the, you know, be a little bit more decisive, you can definitely see him get really, really open, and especially in the intermediate area. Again, I wouldn't compare him to Jerry Jeudy, but because Jeudy is one of these like performative route runners in this way, Judy's best season in the NFL has been the 2024 season with the Cleveland Browns, where he was used as a movement Z, and he was running a lot of just like one cut routes off play action. And he had Jameis Winston, who will just throw it blindly. That helps, of course, when you're looking at the production aspect of it. But that's what I'd love to see from Tyson, is just like get him off ball, get him in motion, and just like one cut and explode at like no wasted motion. I think if he can kind of iron that out of his game, and I think that is a correctable issue, I think he could be a really, really good player.
It's funny because it's like the exact opposite of how you would imagine like that skill set actually translates, right? Like you think that quick twitch, the sort of the ability to burst, and like you think, well, that's man separation skills. Like that's how you get open against man. But actually, unless you have that, you know, real understanding of exactly when you're trying to separate and how you're trying to separate, it doesn't necessarily work against high-level man players. Like they understand what you're doing and they can recover. Like you have a very narrow window of being open because these guys are so good.
100%. A really good quote that CeeDee Lamb gave to me at the Super Bowl this past year was like, as a slot player, you kind of have to get open twice, where like you got to get open off the line, and then at the second phase when you get to your break point of your routes. And I think that's the thing with these guys too, that you kind of have to like, you got to be really decisive at both break points. And I think that's an issue for Tyson, where like,
this is why, like total tangent, but this is why I always worry a lot about, you know, automated AI, computer vision style charting when it comes to separation, because when matters. Like it's not simply what was the largest distance between you and the defender at any point during the play, because there are defenders that will let you get a decent chunk of separation depending on when it comes. And you have to understand like when in the play is that actually taking place, because, you know, you can have a huge amount of separation, but it was at a completely irrelevant point in the course of the rep that didn't really matter. Like that's not open. That's at one point you had a large amount of distance between you and the corner. It's not quite the same thing. And I worry about the capacity of computer vision and AI to actually process that and give you any kind of accurate information. Whereas, you know, the human eye that actually understands the game, I think you have a better chance of being right on that stuff.
I'm with you on that. And I think the longer I've done this, the more I've almost embraced the subjectivity of it. Because like this, number one, it's like this is a game that we're all going to have subjective opinions about this stuff. And, you know, I always say this with reception perception, like I'm not a data provider. This is a reflection of my work, right? Like if I was trying to be a data provider, I'd, you know, have a bunch of people doing the stuff with me, but I'm trying to just give you an example of what I have seen here. And for a lot of this stuff too, by the way, like, yeah, it is within like where in the progression of the play. I mean, as a wide receiver, again, you could run a great route, but if the like separation point is judged when the ball is released by the quarterback, again, you're inviting that other variable in there. And what if you've got not to pick on one player, but you've got a Derek Carr quarterback who's addicted to that quick check down, or, you know, one of those guys that's fritzy under pressure. Like that's a part of it too. Not to mention just like the idea of separation. I mean, okay, 3 yards versus 2 yards, who cares? Like, you're either open or you're not. Like, that's kind of why I've just gone by. And again, this is my opinion. People can feel totally free to disagree and have a different view of it. But to me, it is like a very binary thing. Like, you're either open or you're not. And I think that helps you kind of not be biased towards certain players. You know, I think this is always happens when we get into the draft process too. We've thrown a couple guys out here who are like this, like a Tedero McMillan or a Drake. And it's like, well, these guys can't really separate. It's like, well, they separate. Yeah, they just don't separate like the small jitterbug players. Like,
Right.
they get enough separation to be credible NFL receivers, and especially if you cater to it the right way. So it just, again, it kind of allows you not be biased towards like when you're looking for this many yards of separation versus like, is the guy open or not? Like, and these guys certainly know how to get open.
Yeah, like nobody is open in the NFL. Nobody is college open in the NFL. Like I remember the story of, you know, Peyton Manning sitting down as a rookie with the Bruce Arians, right? And there was a play, you know, that was designed to kind of open up the seam. Peyton Manning didn't throw the ball, and Bruce was like, what the hell? And Manning's like, the guy wasn't open. Bruce like, Peyton, that's open in the NFL. Like, throw that ball. Like the play did its job. You didn't put the ball in the air. And like the whole thing was like, you know, a revelation for Peyton Manning, who had been used to college open. And all of a sudden you're now like, the dude has a slight, like he's got the inside leverage of a guy running towards space. That's open in the NFL, even though in the college that would be blanket cover. Don't even think about it. So yeah, like, you know, you got to, can a guy separate at the NFL level is a whole different conversation than it is at college. Let me hit the two Browns receivers as one before we get on to the second year wide receivers. I thought Casey Concepcion was one of the most, I was conflicted about him more than I think any other receiver in this prospect, because I loved everything before the ball arrived at him, and I hated pretty much everything from that point on. I thought his ball skills in every capacity were average at best. But everything before that was maybe the best in the draft.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And like from the everything is like the best in the draft. Like, if he didn't have the drop problems and just some of those like some of the attack issues, you know, clapping at the ball, some of that stuff, like you would call it like to me a focus drop, where he's like letting the ball into his body because he maybe doesn't trust his hands, or like he's thinking about what if he like just that's the problem, is it's not just like one thing, right? Like, oh, clean this up and then we're good. Like, there's a couple of things he does need to figure out. If it wasn't for that,
just drop, like that's the other thing. It feels like a sort of holistic ball skills problem, right? Like everything at the catch point to me felt a little bit off. Not necessarily terrible, but definitely not a strength in any of those areas.
I would disagree with that a little bit, just based on what I charted from like a contested catch standpoint. Like, you do see him make like really high degree of difficulty, tight coverage catches, which I almost then think, certainly from a fan perspective, it's more annoying, because it's like, why does this guy make the hard catches and drop the easy ones? Like, I do think he can end up being that guy in the NFL, which is super frustrating. But again, if it wasn't for all of that, like I probably would have had him as the number one receiver in the class. And I would have probably had him like a tier above, just from how explosive he is, and from just like how well he separates. To me, he's easily the best separator in the class. Like, explosive, decisive. It's not just good separation skills, it's also really good timing and tempo as a route runner, and the ability to get off press coverage. Like, he had that all in his bag and did that against high degree of difficulty competition. So, you know, you can go on and on, not to mention like the fact that when you put the ball in his hands, he's also a playmaker. Like, yeah, to me, he would have been a tier 1 receiver prospect, but he just has those problems at the catch point, which you hope he can correct. You can't guarantee it's going to happen, though. That is definitely an issue that, to me, I don't think it will be enough to have him wash out of the league, but it would be something that could potentially limit his ceiling. Like, to me, and I'm curious if you have a name for this. Like, I struggle to think of a guy who, you know, like his like drops really ruined his career. Usually the guys that we think usually the guy. Okay, well, before you give me your name, let me just make the case that usually I think, and I'll judge if your name is this, but like usually the guys who wash out of the league, it's because they actually couldn't do anything that made the drops worth living with. But I'm curious, like, who would your name be?
The name we always bring up for this is Greg Little. But actually, the three names I think that I would, one of them didn't wash out of the league for this, but the three names I would come up with where I think drops were a terminal problem at the NFL level. Greg Little was one of them, old Browns receiver back in the day. Troy Williamson, obviously, for the Minnesota Vikings, the guy that was supposed to replace Randy Moss. Tough ask. And then I think Braylon Edwards, actually, drops were his limiting, terminal concern, like elite level prospect, and never really became that player. And I think eventually the drops were the thing that caused him the biggest problem. But Greg Little, I think, was the biggest one, where he was consistently in a position to make plays and then just could not catch a football.
Yeah, admittedly, all of these guys are a little bit like before my time charting receivers. So that's
my
kind of
that's my special. Yeah. Like I need to stay further ahead to the charting, so I can't be proven wrong.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Because people be like, well, A.D. Mitchell has been a guy that's been really limited. I think Mitchell's route running is a little bit overrated. Like, right. I think he's a guy that like has those separation skills where it's like when he gets open, it's like, oh my God, but he is lost like 40% of the time against zone coverage, which is a pretty big.
He also just runs. I mean, when he was coming out of Texas, it's like I don't recognize what these routes are. Like I can't even categorize what that is. It's open, right? Like he's getting to somewhere where a defensive back isn't, and I guess maybe there's something to that. But like I can't tell you what that route actually is. I don't recognize it on a chart anywhere.
Yeah, that's why I've got the other bucket.
He must be off the charts in other, because I have no idea what this is.
Yeah, so you again, just to the point, I do think usually when we think of guys who have had these drop issues, to me, they don't like even Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson obviously has terrible ball skills. It to me was overdrafted where he went, right. But he's like a useful player for the Chargers now, just has a very limited ceiling. So I do think that is within the range of outcomes for KC Concepcion, but my God, everything else is just so good. I do want to bet on him correcting those issues, especially because I think he at least is aware of the fact that it is an issue. Now that is a double-edged sword sometimes, because I do think it's a little bit like you definitely get in your own head about it. I think you could see that with a guy who've made mentions at him a couple of times here, but like Marvin Harrison Jr., you could tell like that was in his head at times last year. I just actually charted the Seattle game in week 4. You remember that Thursday night game, which probably was like, that was after the 49ers game where he had that like wide open drop. And then he's just a nightmare in the first half because he probably had like the most, what I would call like the funniest drop of the season. It's not funny if you're him, and it's not funny if you're a Cardinals fan, but that like slant route going over the middle where he truly just like bumbles it right up, and I believe it was intercepted. After that, it was crazy. And then when he scored a touchdown later in that game on like a tight coverage play, he literally took a knee and was like relieved afterwards. So it can definitely be a mental problem for sure for these guys. But everything else with KC Concepcion is just so truly special that it is hard to like not want to overlook the drops. And again, we're talking about, all right, hopefully he drops like 9 passes in a season at most. And
that's the thing.
He makes.
Yeah, we keep saying like it's not they're not his drop problem or a ball skill problem if you think it's broader than that. Like I don't think it's Greg Little world, right? We're not saying it's definitely bad enough that this is the reason he won't be good, but it's in that fuzzy gray area borderline, right? Like it might be a major problem at the NFL level, or it might be like he has a run of 5 years where he barely drops the football, and then 1 year there's like a bad, he has 12 drops, right?
Like,
and we're like
14% drop rate or something like that. And it's just like, oh my God. And you just don't want it to be also, really, and again, this is hard to know, like, will this happen? But is it going to be on third down? Is it going to be in the red zone? Is it going to be dry? Because I do think like, again, some evaluators and certainly fans treat drops almost the same as like it's a fumble. When it's like it's not the same. You don't have to give the football back to a defense when you drop the football. And again, also like what's worse, like a receiver who drops the football 9 times a season, or a quarterback who turns down a bunch of open throws, and the receiver doesn't get credit for all that. So it's just, again, it's tough. It's a nuanced conversation, and I do think it's worth the nuanced conversation as opposed to just like drops bad, he bad type situation.
And then just a quick mention on Denzel Boston. What do you think his ceiling is as a guy who he got lumped into that? Like Bills fans didn't want any part of Denzel Boston whatsoever because they had Keon Coleman PTSD. I don't feel like they were particularly similar players at all. I thought Boston can win on the outside vertically down the field. Like I think he can separate. I don't think he's in this world of like he's just a big body contested catch guy who can't get open.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was really explosive off the line of scrimmage, and he definitely has some ability to throttle down, which, like, if you're going to be a big X receiver, and I don't think he has to be an exclusive X either, which is pretty cool. The fact that I think Casey Concepcion, despite his build, because he's so good against press coverage, like he can handle some outside on ball work, and then you can move Boston off. Like those two guys in tandem, it's really fun to think about the possibilities. Yeah, it's really fun to think about what they can do for each other, like along the way, and kind of maximize each other's skill sets. That's really, why I think it was a great idea for the Browns to get both of them. But yeah, Boston, I think, is a guy that you can detach him from the ball and have him run a lot of in cuts, like a Michael Pittman type of receiver, or like what the Texans did with Jaden Higgins at times last year. Not necessarily like big slot, but use him as a movement Z in that way when you do get Casey Concepcion some X receiver reps. So yeah, I don't think he is Keon Coleman-ish at all. I do think obviously just big X, these guys typically get dropped in that bucket. It's funny, honestly, I thought like the most similar player from a reception perception standpoint to Keon Coleman was probably Malachi Fields, but I liked Malachi Fields because he went in the third round, and he's a smart player, and I think is a much more mature professional based on everything I know about Malachi, about like the way he handles things, and obviously that's not been a strength for Keon Coleman, and you took him 33rd overall, and threw him probably into an X only role that he definitely should not have handled. I liked him a little bit more than some other people did. So yeah, it's funny. Like that's a guy that he's definitely going to struggle to separate on the vertical stem. I don't think you can really get around that, but he does know how to throttle down and has really good hands. So I like Fields going in the third round there. But yeah, Denzel Boston to me much more of a separator than a Keon Coleman type.
All right, before we get into the second-year wide receivers, just a little break to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's right, turn $5 into $250 in bonus bets just for getting started. And when every possession matters in the playoffs, FanDuel makes it easier to get closer to the action. From player props and your favorite stars to all the tools you need to back them up, FanDuel puts player research right at your fingertips so you can check stats, trends, and matchups all in one place and make your picks with confidence. It's everything you need all in one app so you don't miss your shot. Head to FanDuel.com/3030 to get started. FanDuel, play your game. 21 plus in selected states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus in DC, Kentucky, and Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit required. Bonus issues non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat. In Connecticut, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. In Maryland, visit gamblinghelp line ma.org. Call 800-327-5050. In Massachusetts, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Text HOPE-NY. New York, call 1-877-770-7867. In Louisiana. Man, those terms and conditions are they're something.
Pay the bills.
Got to pay the bills. Okay, so let's start with this. Who's the most interesting year two wide receiver to you based off how their rookie seasons went? And I guess the charting data that you just broke out.
I mean, I think if we're talking most interesting, I think it is Travis Hunter, right? Like how often does he play wide receiver? Because man, I mean, he's tough from a charting standpoint because obviously, like I said, I collect 8 games in a sample, and for these rookies, for a lot of these guys, and I mentioned it in the write-ups, it's like this is again, it's not just data. It's also I write about 1,000 words for every player that I put on the site. I'm usually mentioning this in the write-up that like, yeah, this guy really improved in the second half of the year. We never got that for Hunter, but even what we did get, especially by the time he was kind of ramping up towards like right when the injury happened, he was really impressive. And I still think he is, again, if we're taking a look at just what he was versus everybody else on the roster, I think you can make an argument he's still their best separator. Now, is he their best route runner? Probably not, because like Jacoby Myers is really good at that. He's such a professional. And I think Hunter, the thing that he struggled with the most was adjusting to like zone coverage and when to settle and when to be in the right spots. That was certainly no question a work in progress, and that's reflected in his charting data. But we're talking about like running these big horizontal breaking routes against man coverage. Like, yeah, he could explode open, and Trevor Lawrence, I think, really started to kind of grow and trust in that connection. And again, by the time he got hurt, I really liked the way they were using him more as like a downfield receiver, as opposed to kind of what I would say were like Mickey Mouse routes to start his NFL career as that like F only receiver. So yeah, I have no idea what the allocation of snaps will look like for him. They've obviously said that his corner work is going up, and I think he could be a fantastic corner. But just as a receiver only player, it's going to be hard for them to not want to get him on the field a ton if he's healthy, if he's out there, if his body can handle it, which of course we have no idea about that stuff until we see it. But yeah, still a really good and explosive receiver that I think can bring a lot of value to that room.
Yeah, he's always going to be one of the most interesting players in the NFL just because of what he's attempting to do, right? Be this two-way player at a serious level at a serious volume of workload as well. I think people, I mean, there's no nuance in the world anymore. So I think people very easily just skew to ridiculous places when it comes to Travis Hunter. Like, I think he was right on the precipice of breaking out as a wide receiver when he got hurt. Like, the two of his last 3 games, I think, had been much higher volume. He is a catch point savant as well. Like, that dude makes plays on the ball when it's in the air that few people can. And then the one thing that gets brought up, it's funny, it gets used as like a dunk, even though I think it's worth bringing up just to remind people. I tweeted at the Combine that year. I was like asking everybody that I ran into, like, who do you think the best wide receiver in this draft class is? And I couldn't find anybody that didn't think Travis Hunter was the best wide receiver in the class. The first person that I found that thought McMillan was wide receiver 1 in that draft class was Trevor Sikkema. Everybody else thought that Travis Hunter was the best pure, like if you just rank him as a wide receiver, that Travis Hunter was wide receiver 1 in that draft class. And then obviously, you know, McMillan has rookie of the year caliber season, but and Hunter gets hurt, but I wouldn't forget the idea that he could still be a really, really good wide receiver.
And I don't think they've forgotten that either, just because like Parker Washington had a good, and I like Parker Washington, by the way. I've always kind of had a little affinity for him as a player, like just because he had a good stretch and because they brought in Jacoby Myers, who like Jacoby Myers will be 30 years old here pretty soon. Like I believe he turns 30 later this year. Like you don't know that he's just going to be that metronome that he was for a good stretch. And obviously Brian Thomas Jr. unfortunately had a really disappointing second season. And I'm not 100% sure where he fits into this room. And I was talking with Nate yesterday on our fantasy show over at Yahoo that like, you know, clearly the Jaguars are trying to like get into more heavier personnel packages this year. You know, they drafted 2 tight ends. Their GM, James Gladstone, literally said like, this is the trend of the league. So we're going to try to fit in with the trend of the league, which, you know, you can have a conversation about whether you want to be ahead of the trend or behind the trend or whatever. If your hipster band is already making, you know, stadium tours, has they already sold out? You know, that's kind of the question you have to ask there. But anyways, they're clearly trying to play more of those packages. Could he be like the ideal Travis Hunter, the ideal ISO receiver in like 13 personnel looks where it's like, we're just going to give you a small handful of routes and like, this is how we get you on the field if he's a package player. And I agree with you. Like there's no reason to assume he's just going to be a package player because he was that good before he got hurt. And I was definitely one of those people that thought he was not just the best receiver in last year's class, but if he hit, like he would be a tier better than everybody else. It's just a little bit difficult to know like what his, again, allocation of snaps is going to look like. But yeah, like they have a pretty solid, I would say a pretty solid wide receiver room without Travis Hunter, but his ability really, in my opinion, takes it to a different level.
Can you explain Brian Thomas Jr. to me? Does the charting data give any insight as to what the hell has happened in his career so far? Because I did not like him as a prospect coming into the league at all. Like I was incredibly low on Brian Thomas Jr. relative to everybody else. And then after his rookie season, I completely 180 flipped and said he might be the best receiver in this draft class. Like the 3 elite prospects of Odunze, Harrison, and Malik Neighbors, Thomas Jr. might be better than any of them. he's like this complete receiver that can do everything and threaten in every way. And then year 2 was just awful relative to that. And now I have no idea what to think.
I can definitely give you an insight on kind of what's happened. What's going to happen next, I think, is tough. I truly have no idea. Now here, to me, I think whenever a guy has, a disappointing second season, or maybe like a disappointing back half of his rookie season, I think you do have to like go back to the prospect profile a little bit. And I do think for Brian Thomas Jr., I certainly liked him more than you did, for sure, as a prospect. It sounds like you were a lot lower on him than I was, but I did say he was kind of in that bucket of volatile prospects, right? Like, Christian Watson, Martavis Bryant, Quentin Johnston was kind of in this. That's like I thought he was the best, most actualized version of that. But that skill set, which is to me like an X only skill set, where he can be excellent against press man coverage, but the zone coverage stuff is a little bit hit or miss. Like there's always volatility to those players. And I think that things that were small issues, if you go back and look at like his rookie year reception perception profile, which for the most part was really good, but there were 2 things that were kind of like what I would call small issues, or like things he needed to get better on: layup routes over the middle of the field and winning against zone coverage. Like he was a little bit below average as a zone beater in his rookie season. And those 2 things were massive problems in his second season. So like that is sort of these weaknesses, I think, compounded on themselves. And he probably was, dealing with some injuries throughout the course of the year. There was like the shoulder thing, I think that Liam Cohen said it was, or the wrist or whatever. I think that was part of it. But I also think they kind of overloaded him at the beginning, where like Cohen even said this at the combine last year. Oh man, I didn't know he could do this. He could do this. He could do this. He could do that. Like based on his rookie year film. And I think they got it into camp and tried to have him do all these things. Like, I don't actually, let's start paring this back. And I do think he can still be like, his profile in year 2 looks like a solid, like a starting X receiver, but a guy that would be limited to kind of that sacrificial bucket. So certainly I think still a useful player in that role, but the rookie year production, I think we can also be honest too, Sam, that a lot of the rookie year production was at the end of the year for a bad Jaguars team that was going nowhere with Mac Jones as the quarterback and basically everybody else was hurt. I think Thomas was still really good in isolation, but some of the production, and I always say this with receivers, like if the production is good and the film doesn't totally match it and the offense still sucks or has problems while the production is coming, like I think you do have to at least raise an eyebrow at the production a little bit. This hasn't been a universal thing. I've gotten situations wrong when I've talked about this, but that's something that I would always encourage with wide receivers. You got to take a little bit of look at that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's talk about Emeka Egbuka, because I think he's another one that was interesting in terms of his production right out of the gate surprised me. Like I didn't, and the fact that he was being used as an X receiver and a lot of that stuff that I didn't think he really showed a lot of ability to do at the college level. And then his production tailed off in the second half, but he also got injured. Does he have this way higher ceiling than people, again, universally kind of everyone saw him basically the same? Did everybody have it wrong? Is he actually capable of doing way more than we saw, or did he settle into what everyone just expected him to be by the end of the season?
Yeah, another very similar thing where I'd say, like, at the beginning of the year, I agree with you. It was like, oh man, I didn't think he would be winning, as the X receiver like this at times. And then, he's putting up unbelievable production, like he's the best receiver in the NFL. And then he starts to slip in the back. I was like, okay, well, let's go back to the prospect profile and think about what he actually was, and it was a good prospect, not an elite prospect for sure. Like a really good safe receiver that I thought at worst would be a good solid number 2 if he really hit like what we would imagine for him. I think he did exceed expectations on balance, like as a man coverage beater, but still, I think he does need to play as a Z receiver, which it sounds like Zach Robinson has already said he's going to play in that role. I totally think that makes sense. Like Jalen McMillan's a nice player, but he's probably your best vertical option. Like sacrifice him at X a couple times, even though he is probably more of another speed Z receiver. Chris Godwin can play on ball in the slot. And then they took Ted Hurst in the 3rd round, which I thought was a pretty important pick for them. Like he's a guy that could start as that sacrificial X so that you have Godwin in the slot and Ibuka at Z. And then again, he's going to run a lot more routes in motion because by the end of the year, not by the end of the year, but in that like midpoint of the year, again, after he got hurt as well, that's definitely something to talk about with Ibuka. I thought he's one of these guys that got worse from a reception perception standpoint from when I charted him for the in-season rookie report in November, and then like the more games you added at the end of the year, like I thought his numbers dipped, which is unusual. Usually they improve. He is a guy that I think did not play as well because of the injury, but still is someone that I don't think you want to have as your number one X receiver. Like he could be your number one in the progression, number one in the passing game,
right,
as we were kind of talking about at the beginning of the show, but I don't think you can have him as your X. You have to roll cater to him a little bit.
And particularly with Mike Evans moving on, like that role is now opening up within that offense schematically to be the guy that the offense is built around, even if he doesn't play a ton of X, right? To be the Amon-Ra St. Brown, like to be the number one receiver in the offense, even if he doesn't, like you just need somebody occupying the X position. That's why I agree with you. I think we had Trevor on talking about this as well. Like I think Ted Hurst is going to get a ton of workload in this, or a ton of playing time in this offense, just because he can line up at X and they don't have to think about it.
Exactly. I mean, Robinson even said that, like at minicamp or whatever it was. I don't know. I'm always confused as to which level of not training camp we're at. But anyways, OTAs or whatever, he said that's the ideal part of having Ted Hurst is he can, dictate coverages and just the alignment part of it. And to me, that was so sacrificial X receiver coded. And it's fine. Like if he starts his career, by the way, as that player, and then just gets better and better. Like Alec Pierce is a great example of a guy that was 100% like a sacrificial X his first couple of years. I mean, that if you go back and look at like the per route or just production relative to snaps in his second season when Gardner Minshew was the quarterback, like he's out there running and he's getting his cardio in, but he's not getting a lot of footballs thrown his way. Like he was, and meanwhile, Michael Pittman had one of his better production-based years. Josh Downs had a nice rookie season in 23 as well, and Pierce was that sacrificial X. And then he just was allowed and afforded the time by a very patient, maybe sometimes too patient organization in Indianapolis to get better and better on the job. And then by year 4, this past year, he's still like, again, similar archetype of player, but a fundamentally better version of that player. And he obviously had a really good season that got him a lot of money.
What does the data say about Luther Burden? How excited should we be? Because I know there's some statistics that he showed extremely well in last season. I found him such a fascinating prospect because he's one of those guys where you turn on the tape and okay, there are flaws and there are some question marks and concerns, but he's one of those guys who visibly immediately just moves differently to everybody else. And I still think there's power to that, right? That in a sport and a league of elite athletes where you're obviously a better athlete than everybody around you, you can't only get by on that. You still need, you still need technique and other things. But if you have that, it is a rare thing and he's got it.
100% he's got it. And he's one of these guys, like I said, with Jordan Tyson, where it's like, once I learned the landing spot, I'm like, oh, I feel a lot better. Because for Luther Burden, like you could tell, I'm sure you felt the same way watching him, like, I need a little bit more from you, buddy. Like, I mean, I need in college, like I needed more effort, especially against like zone coverage. He would just run himself into leverage and like, that was it. It's okay, on to the next one. It's like, here's the deal. That is never going to fly in Ben Johnson and Antoine and Ben Johnson's offense and Antoine Randall L's receiver room. So like when he went to Chicago, I was like, well, if it's going to work somewhere, it's going to work there. And you could tell that they pushed him really hard, which is what he needed. He needed to be pushed. He needed that sort of, it's not too dissimilar with Jameson Williams is a guy that needed to be pushed in Detroit. And I think they kind of gave him some of the same level of coaching. Of course, they went to the same high school too, I believe, Jameson and Luther Burden. So again, just that was the right place to land. And I think by the time you saw him get on the field, he really had some of those details in terms of being in the right place at the right time against zone coverage down. Now he is also a really good man beater, which is why I've always liked Luther Burden a lot as a prospect, is that like he can run some big outcuts against man coverage from the slot as the Z receiver. I think him, and I'm still really, really high on Roma Dunze. I know he definitely fell off in the back half of the season after playing through and missing practice time with a really bad injury. But I think those guys are going to be an awesome, awesome tandem this year. And I just think I've watched so much of this Bears offense, whether charting Burden, and then I just finished Odunze a couple days ago. That offense just rules. It's so good. It's so well designed. I think it continues to go the right direction. I think that offense is going to absolutely rip it up this year, and Burden included. Like the fact that he is somebody that, as you mentioned, with the ball in his hands is special and can also run routes and is learning those nuances as a zone beater. That is a pretty enticing package of players.
And it felt like they were discovering that in real time late in the season. It's like, obviously they thought the Burden was talented, and, some of the other young players were talented, but suddenly it's like, oh, look what happens when we start feeding these guys the ball. Like they're really good.
They're really good.
Give them more. Like, let's build this thing around them.
It's worth noting too with Burden, he missed time in the offseason with an injury, and obviously this is an offense that if you fall behind on the details, like, yeah, you fall behind. I mean, Odunze said the same thing to me in February, that his biggest thing with the injury was not just physically playing through the injury, but it was like the lost reps in practice, because this is such a like detail offense. And he was like, I just completely fell out of rhythm with it. And whereas Burden, on the other hand, through the course of the year was finding more rhythm with it because he didn't have the practice time in the off season. And if you're not right and tight on the details, like, you're not playing in this offense, period, end of story. Except the guy that was the highest paid receiver in the room last year, DJ Moore, is like never. That's just, I don't know if you felt the same way, Sam, but it was just so funny watching the Bears at times last year. It's like there's 10 guys running the Ben Johnson offense, and then there's one guy just, and I'm not saying this is like to be mean to DJ Moore, but it just was like almost like the sacrificial player at times, as that vertical option. And it just was a very weird fit. And obviously I think we all kind of knew it was going to be a 1-year deal. And now Burden, I think, will step into that allocation of snaps and targets and everything.
Yeah, I'm really excited for what he can do in year 2. I think people generally overlook that thing you mentioned of, if you miss practice time or you miss time, even in training camp and stuff, for a young player at certain positions, I think it's really important. I mean, Mike Tomlin talked about this with Roman Wilson. I think that, like, the phrase he used, I think, is it's really hard to jump on a moving train. Like, once this thing is going, it's really difficult to get on mid-season if you missed a chunk of time. And all right, he's ready now. Like, everyone, we just assume from the outside, well, he's healthy, therefore he should be playing. But if he missed all that time to kind of get up to speed, it's hard to jump on that moving train once it's going.
100%. Yeah. And I think you see that a lot with rookie receivers, especially.
Yeah, exactly. Like young receivers, I think it's a really big deal. Okay, quick break to talk about our friends over at Root Insurance before we get into one more of these year 2 receivers that I think is maybe the most fascinating. Root Insurance believes that good drivers deserve better rates, so they've created a new kind of car insurance that rewards good drivers in an easy-to-use app. Traditional car insurance companies focus on demographics like age, zip code, occupation, and credit score to price your coverage. When Root offers a rate, your behavior behind the wheel gets more weight than any other single factor. They don't use occupation or education level to negatively affect your rate. While you drive, Root gathers and analyzes data from your smartphone sensors. After a few weeks, you get a car insurance quote based primarily on your driving. Save up to 44% off your initial Root quote after you take the test drive. If you need a tow truck, jump start, or if you lock your keys in the car, Root will help cover the assistance you need to get back on the road when you opt in to roadside assistance. The Root app makes it easy to edit your coverage, update your policy, or file a claim in just 3 minutes. You can get started today at root.com. And today, we are providing that roadside assistance to the Green Bay Packers and Matthew Golden. So what does the data say about Matthew Golden? Because on the one hand, there are very few good wide receivers that have posted that level of like inefficiency, lack of production in year 1, particularly as sort of high end first round wide receivers, right? On the other hand, every time I watched him play, I kind of liked what I saw. So why didn't he have more production as a rookie?
I was so curious. Is like, which second year receiver, Sam? Great tease before the break. Like, who's the most fascinating? My mind's going this way, that way. I almost kind of forgot about Matthew Golden because he was the first rookie last year's rookie that I finished the charting on. Because I was like, I'm with you. What the hell was going on? Because when I did the midseason rookie report, I didn't really have like a strong take on the film. I thought it was okay.
Right.
But it wasn't bad, but it wasn't so good that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they aren't getting this guy the football or anything like that.
Kind of how I felt about him as a prospect as well. It's like,
yeah,
cool.
Like he's good. He's good. Yeah, I like it, right? And I kind of still feel that way after finishing the sample, where I was like, yeah, I don't think anything was just like he didn't have one of these rookie seasons of a guy like I think I've said him a couple times, but like Quentin Johnson had one of those rookie seasons like, oh man, that was just a disaster.
Yeah.
Now he's been able to get it back or together, or some other guys that have actually flamed out like Marquise Lee or some of the other just Devin Funchess, these guys that have been just Justin Hunter still has the lowest success rate versus man coverage that I've ever charted back in 2014. So there's been some just like disaster class rookie seasons in RP. And then, we just launched this new player comparison tool where you can put in like the player and then it gives you back like 10 comps essentially. And I think it works really well for these guys, that are like these disappointing rookies. Like for example, Alec Iomanner is one of these guys that had a really, in my opinion, just disaster rookie season. Totally unfair to him. I mean, he's a day 3 draft pick. And he gets thrown into like essentially a very X heavy role. His top 5 comps were Geronimo Allison. Didn't think you'd hear that name today, did you? Preston Williams, Marquise Lee, Kelvin Benjamin, and then Cortland Sutton. So it's like, okay, you got a 1 in 5 shot, Right. So, but it wasn't that level of just from a separation standpoint, just such a mess for Matthew Golden. It was just kind of fine to, maybe I think a little disappointing against zone coverage, but he's another guy that I would point out that, and I had one of my subscribers actually noted this too, which is always good when they can give you a good idea. He's like, do you think it's a little unfair for Matthew Golden that they kind of, I think, probably wanted him to be like a speed Z receiver, but then when Jaden Reed got hurt, they kind of threw him into that receiver role, which is a very different one than I think what you'd want, because Matthew Golden to me is not like a design touches or like he could be a slot, but he's more of, again, that movement Z receiver where he's like a vertical option in the intermediate and deep area. And I think there's maybe some, point to that, because I think they did try to use him on these like layup routes, and that was not really where he was good at Texas. He's more of that, like, get him in the intermediate area and have him explode out of his cuts. And so I wouldn't say, like, honestly, I don't really have a bullish take on what's going to happen with Matthew Golden. Like, I think he could be a fine NFL player. I wouldn't say like, oh my God, I feel like if they just give him an opportunity, he could be a superstar. But it's pretty clear they are going to give him an opportunity. Like, for the first time in a while, the Packers might not be doing that rotate nonsense at the wide receiver room. Like, it kind of seems like they have 3 guys, Watson, Golden, and Reed. A lot of injury questions there, but Watson, Golden, Reed, like that's their 3, and they're just going to roll it out there. And I actually think that might be good for these guys.
And for the first time in a long time, like really defined roles. Like Green Bay has had this sort of not just a mismatch of like, everyone's going to get the ball a bit. It's like everyone's going to play everywhere. There's no logic to any of this. It's just you got a bunch of guys in the room and they're all going to do everything. All of a sudden, you've got 3 guys, and all 3 of them are very different skill sets that like fit. This is the specific role you're going to have within this system. Like, it makes way more sense than it's ever made in the last like 5 years.
Yeah, it's like very complimentary, and I think Christian Watson, by the way, was awesome last year.
He looked really good.
And he is someone I've been a little bit lower than consensus on at times, because I don't think he was a consistent player whatsoever, even when he was having his really good moments. Yeah. But I was one of the shocks of the season, not to mention that he tore his ACL in January of 2025. I was like, I don't even know if he's going to play at all. Like,
came back and was better than he's ever been.
Better than he's ever been. It was crazy. So again, knock on wood that he can stay healthy. I love Jaden Reed, big fan there. So I would say that right now my confidence level is higher on Watson and Reed as individuals, and then Golden is kind of the wild card in the mix.
Well, there was nothing in his profile, in his charting that said he should have been as like, I see it. This guy's just garbage. Like, no, the kind of eyes were right in terms of he looked better than the numbers said.
Yeah, like, but not so much better again. Like, there's a sliding scale of it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's kind of where I would come down. And I think also, just again, from his standpoint, getting him a clear role in that room is the key. And I like your way of framing it, that they kind of have those guys right now, because I definitely think that will help Matthew Golden a lot, and just like more vertical stuff for him, because his vertical routes very good. Some of the like in breakers I don't think were as good for Matthew Golden. Like showing on the screen right now, like they kind of had to use him a lot there, where I think he's more of just that like vertical out breaking receiver. So there's definitely something to him and kind of what we can have here. So just clearer role, more opportunities, I think will be good for all these guys involved. I mean, it was not that hard to read into Matt LaFleur's comments. I think at one of the league meetings recently where he said, yeah, we had guys who were kind of upset with their role last year, and it really kind of, just it took a toll on the season. Like, yeah, in the receiver room. And I could have told you that was going to happen because it's you have like no hierarchy, right? You don't have a true one. You've got a bunch of like good players, and I think that just did take its toll on the team. So I hope they run these three guys out and they just kind of let it rock.
Were there any other year two wide receivers who had interesting profiles to you? Who else do you want to hit on before I want to wrap up with a little quick talk on some of the third year guys?
The guy that was the charting is better than the numbers was Jack Besh this past year. Ooh. Like, I think Besh, I know for a fact that like not all the coaches on that staff wanted him. And so that was obviously a big problem for him. And like, to me, it was so weird how they handled that receiver room last year, especially in terms of the two rookies. Cause like Dante Thornton was a guy's like, oh, I think you could take Dante Thornton on the third day and like develop him for a few years. And they just like pushed him in the deep end of the pool as their X receiver run. It was crazy coming out of Tennessee in the Looney Tunes offense. That made no sense to me. And then Besh, like even when he got an opportunity last year, he was kind of an X receiver running a lot of like 9 routes. Like that's the one route he can't run. He's like good at basically everything else, but you don't want him running as like the X receiver on the boundary running those vertical routes. But I think when you saw him in the short and underneath area, he actually did show a pretty good ability to separate. I think he's a fluid player. I don't think he's stiff. And I think if you use him off ball and kind of in tandem as the F receiver move tight end with Brock Bowers, like I think there's actually some real potential there for him in this version of the offense as opposed to what we saw last year.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that because like I really quite like Jack Besh.
Same, yeah.
Out. And then I mean he had no kind of production year one. It's like, dude, they could use somebody like Jack Besh. Like, where is he in this offense?
It was so crazy too. Like they trade Jacoby Myers. Like, all right, well, this is like Jack Besh dropping right in that role. Nope. They still kind of play him outside on the ball. It's like, what are we doing here? It was pretty clear that again, the front office liked Jack Besh. They took him. And then the coaching staff's like, yeah, we don't care. So it's tough. It's the reason those guys aren't coaching there anymore.
Last guy to mention, or I want to ask a question about, what is the role now for Torrey Horton in Seattle? Because he, I thought, looked really good before he got hurt. Then they trade for Rashid Shaheed. Now they paid Rashid Shaheed. So obviously, like he's still going to remain a big part of that offense. They felt like vaguely similar, redundant type players. What does Torrey Horton now have to be within that offense?
So I mentioned that player comparison tool that we just put on the site. Do you know Torrey Horton's
don't make me sad. Don't
comparable
make me sad.
Player?
What's it going to be?
It's 2025 Rashid Shaheed. So like I think obviously again some of that is because Rashid Shaheed was dropped into the role that Torrey Horton generally vacated. So when you look at like the algorithm of the
deployment wise,
that's part of it. But skill set wise, I do think there's some similarity there too. But yeah, I love Horton, man. I thought he was a really good route runner. I thought he got open against press coverage as a rookie, like those big in cuts that are key in this offense. Like, and when he really started getting going too, his ability to play outside on the line helped maximize Jackson Smith and Jigba. And again, obviously JSN didn't need any help, but like the fact they could then move him around, and they continued to kind of do that through the course of the season after Torrey Horton got hurt. But yeah, such a bummer that he has this breakout game against Washington, picks up a shin injury, and then we just never see him again. So he might be blocked, right? Because Cooper Kupp is still there. Rashid Shaheed is there now. Obviously JSN is JSN. He might be blocked right now, but I definitely think he's somebody that like is a good sleeper to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I really liked him coming out. He was a guy that I saw the year before and was like, going through like a list of receivers. I was like, why is nobody talking about Torrey Horton? It's like, oh, it turns out he went back to college. He's not in this draft at all.
Yeah.
I wasted a couple of hours watching his tape and was wondering why nobody was mentioning this guy as like a high-end wide receiver in the draft class that he wasn't in. Then he gets hurt, obviously, and knee injury, blah, blah, blah. So his stock was down the following year as well. But like he can play. Like he showed that already.
I think. He can absolutely play. It is so frustrating too because he goes in the 5th round, I'm like, he's not a 5th round talent. He's like a
Right.
second, to me, like was a 2nd round talent that goes in the 5th round because of injuries, and then he gets hurt in his rookie year. So it's like, well, all right, there you
That's
go.
not helping, right? Okay, 3rd-year wide receivers. We already talked about Brian Thomas Jr. I think we're kind of everyone thinks Malik Neighbors is great. He's going to be fantastic if he can just stay healthy. Explain Marvin Harrison Jr. to me. Why was one of the most universally acclaimed prospects to come along in years so universally acclaimed that he didn't bother working out? He's like, they've seen everything. It's on the tape. I'm elite. And he's been, you can't say he's been garbage at the NFL level, but has been so far below the expected standard that it makes no sense to me.
It is definitely puzzling, and it's tough too, because like watching Marvin Harrison Jr. film, it is like gaslighting yourself, because like as a route runner and as a separator, like to me, people who say you can't separate, like that's crazy. I definitely see this guy like, is he the fastest player in a straight line? Definitely not, but he certainly knows how to get open, especially working over the intermediate middle of the field, which is what Drew Petzing wants out of the X receiver in that offense. Like, you got to run a lot of dig routes. This is not what Kyler Murray throws. So you're sitting there with Marvin Harrison and you're like, oh my God, like this guy's getting wide open and Kyler Murray's turning down these throws for the little stick routes to Trey McBride. I mean, shoot, like I even talked to Trey McBride in February this past year and asked him like, hey, they really ran that offense for you. He's like, I wasn't really he literally said, I don't know how often I was the first read, but I was getting the football a lot. It's like, yeah, they're trying to get these like big in cuts to, Marvin Harrison Jr. and the quarterback just doesn't consistently take them. But then sometimes when the quarterback would take them, then Marvin Harrison like misplays the ball at the catch point. And he definitely is a guy who honestly, you could say that I would assert that what I wrote up in his prospect profile as minor attack issues at the catch point, it actually ended up being major issues in the NFL.
Right.
I would say that's been a problem. So again, that's like the gaslighting of yourself is like, this guy's getting open. He's getting open. And then like Kyler Murray actually does take the throw and puts it in the right spot. And then Harrison just doesn't come down with it, whether it's like a clean drop or a contested loss or whatever. And then unfortunately, we never really got to see him with Jacoby Brissett, because in Brissett's first start, gets a concussion like 5 plays into the Colts game. And then he comes back, has the monster game against Dallas, and then picks up the heel injury and doesn't really play consistently throughout the course of the rest of the season. So that kind of like would have been a fun test case, right? Like getting with a different quarterback who just certainly runs that. Again, you could say what you want about to me, Sam, is like Petzing, Harrison, and Murray, I think just all needed to get away from each other. And like now they have, so we can judge them a little bit better now. But yeah, again, it was frustrating season for sure these last couple of years for Harrison.
I don't know that I've ever seen a quarterback and wide receiver less able to be on the same page when it comes to like back shoulder throws and stuff. Like it was weird. Like one of them was doing something wrong every single time they attempted one of those plays. And I could never work out which one. Like, are they both just unable to be on the same page? Is one of them constantly the reason that these fail, or is this just weird chemistry that doesn't work?
And he also is a little bit of just an odd player, is Marv, because I think the fact that he's this big receiver and is so highly regarded, I almost think has kind of had people miss the plot on what he is as to me, he's a craftsman. Like he's a high tier technician of a player. Yeah. And again, the player comparison tool, like a lot of his rookie seasons, there's like 3 Calvin Ridley seasons in there, which you look at that and be like, what? Like Calvin Ridley, like these guys don't look the same at all. It's like, well, yeah, but they do kind of play the same. So yeah, I think you need like the right type of quarterback and the right type of not total. I don't know that he needs to become like a slot receiver in the NFL, but the right type of role catering for a guy like that, which I do think this offense will fit him pretty well, but I think it also fits Michael Wilson really well. I think Michael Wilson's awesome. So yeah, it's just an interesting career that I think now, and people get mad about this because like, well, you're moving the goalposts. So, yeah, you have to move the goalposts based on what you've seen so far. Right. Can he just be like a good starting receiver in the NFL? Because so far that's been a hit or miss journey.
I mean, it looks already pretty clear that he's not going to be this, generational next Jamar
No,
Chase type of player
no,
at the NFL level. So if you're not moving the goalposts at this stage, you're insane. Like we
exactly.
got it. We've already got it wrong on Marvin
Right.
so far. Like it's pretty clear he's never going to be that guy. So let's focus on what he actually can be, because that's already gone.
Exactly. Like, can he be not just, and not even like just useful? Can he be a good, like,
Right.
have like a top 10?
How do we get him being good?
Yeah. Can we get him being like a top 10 receiver in the NFL, which I
Right.
think is still, I do think the generational stuff always
Right.
stinks. Like, obviously it's terrible. It's like a dumb way thing to, oh yeah, he's the next generational prospect since Jamar Chase, who came into the league like 3 years before him. It's always tough, but yeah, that's what you got to move the goalposts for these guys who, we were wrong about what he would be if that was
Right.
the analysis.
All right, let's get you out here on this. We got some wide receiver news for the wide receiver show over the weekend. Rashee Rice, multiple bits to this news, I guess. So number one, he's in jail because he got popped he violated his probation for smoking weed, effectively, as I understand it, and so he's now in jail for 30 days or whatever it is. But also, in the midst of all this, he underwent a cleanup procedure on his right knee to remove loose debris, according to Adam Schefter. The rehab of which is typically a couple of months, but he's now rehabbing from jail, which can't help. Like, I don't know what kind of rehabbing facilities they have in jail, but it strikes me as probably less good than an NFL team facility. So at this point, I guess my overall question is, what are the Chiefs planning on doing with Rashee Rice, who would ordinarily be like the linchpin of that offense, right? Like the receiver that they build the whole thing around, but he's now got so many, red flags / concerns / things that, can they do that? Like, do they have to just play him out this year, figure out another way of taking this thing, or are they still actually going to try and build this thing around Rashee Rice?
Yeah. You mentioned Schefter's report. Like, I saw Mike Golick Jr. point this out, but the fact that but he is also facing the uncertainty of having to recover while in jail is just an insane sentence.
Basic statement.
It's insane. And by the way, speaking of insane, I think it was insane that the Chiefs was just basically going to run back this receiver room plus 5th round pick Cyrus Allen, who, by the way, I really like Cyrus Allen. Like, Sam, you get a couple beers in me, I would tell you he's the best like man coverage beater on the team, which comes back to the point about Rashee Rice that I wouldn't have even been considering giving him like a monster second contract even before this. Like, the off-field issues obviously are, you can't rely on this guy, like, period. I know, like, nobody cares about smoking weed. I don't know. Maybe we can't, I don't know what. I mean,
it's like it nets out, right? It's like these things where you didn't get what you deserved the first time around, you did the second time around for something like a lifetime achievement award, right? Like, being popped for weed is not a reason to be in jail for 30 days, in my opinion. However, what you did with the car was, so let's just call it even.
I mean, probably I would say 30 days in jail, maybe a little bit less than,
right,
maybe
exactly.
Again, this isn't, nobody cares about our legal opinions, but I mean, this is, are you a reliable person test? And that is something that Rashee Rice has failed over and over again. And again, I think when you just look at him on the field, like, he's a really productive player, but in November of last season, I wrote an article about the Chiefs offense for Yahoo. It's like, why is the Chiefs offense not, like, why is it a little disappointing? It's like, well, they can't beat man coverage, and they have run game issues, which they did try to solve this year, but they also can't beat man coverage. Well, guess what? The guy they feed all these targets to is not a man coverage beater in Rashee Rice. He's a guy that is a specific player. Like, he's a zone beater. He's really good with the ball in his hands, but he's not like a true route runner in that way. And that would be fine if you also had other guys that complemented that skill set. But you don't. You have a bunch of other guys, like Xavier Worthy needs a ton of, like, Rashee Rice gets a lot of role catering in that offense to put up what I think is production that overweights his, like, ability, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But Xavier Worthy is a guy that needs that role catering too. And then, so, okay, well, you can't role cater to everybody. Travis Kelce at this point needs a little bit of that role catering at this point in his career. Like, this team desperately needs somebody that can line up outside and beat man coverage. That's not Rashee Rice. That's not Xavier Worthy on a consistent basis. And it's just, it's not Tyquan Thornton other than like these explosive plays. And that's the guys they brought back. So like this team should have signed Stephon Diggs 7 days ago. They should probably sign him now, or they should go get him now, or trade for AJ Brown. Like, I don't know, but I actually think Diggs makes a ton of sense in this receiver room, and I think is a pretty big missed opportunity that they haven't got that done.
It would also be a fascinating, like, Diggs leaving Buffalo put their receiving core into this bucket as well, where like they become the teams we talked about up top, which is like you can have one of those guys where we build the offense around you in a non-X role, and you get force fed all these targets. You can't really have more than one. It doesn't work that way. So the Bills, I think, have basically been in that world since they got rid of Stephon Diggs. And now Diggs could be the answer to stop the Chiefs being in that world. Like that would be a pretty fascinating symmetry.
It is very funny in that way. And yeah, like that's the best way to say it is you can have one of those guys and you can actually feed that guy a ton of volume, but you need the secondary threat. And I think Kansas City look, Andy Reid knows he's going to forget more about football than I'm going to ever learn in my entire life. But I think that this like the way they've approached this wide receiver room has been is pretty rough. Like it was, and I've been, by the way, this is not hindsight analysis. I've been saying this for years about this receiver position in Kansas City. The body and like some of the guys I've liked, like I actually liked Sky Moore as a prospect, but
same, there's another don't even get me started on Sky Moore.
Yeah, you got a level of competition adjustment needed to be done with him, and then like he had a whatever rookie season in isolation, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that probably wasn't going to work out. And by the way, like they threw him on the outside a ton too because they were using Rashee Rice in the slot. And I'm not even saying using Rashee Rice in the slot is a bad idea. Obviously, it's been great, but there was nothing about Sky Moore that was like, oh yeah, he's going to win in the NFL level on the outside. So yeah, just again, there's been one bad move after another at this position. I said after they lost the Super Bowl, like they should trade for George Pickens, when they got smoked by the Chiefs. Didn't happen. It probably should have happened, but again, they need that type of player. You're not going to find like that guy in the middle of his prime right now here in May, but I do think Diggs was awesome against man coverage last year. He still can clearly separate. So yeah, and I mean, obviously he hasn't had a clean legal offseason, but here we are.
Well, I mean, he got cleared. So
he got cleared. Yeah. Not
moving
guilty.
The right direction legally.
Yeah, we're moving the right direction, and we're looking at these Chiefs receivers. But yeah, man, it's a tough one. And I do think for me, if I'm them, there's like no shot. I'd be thinking about like, okay, what does our room look like without Rashee Rice? Because we can't count on that guy.
Yeah. Matt, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for stepping in and doing this. I would urge everybody to go to receptionperception.com. It's an awesome resource. As you say, it isn't just the charting. You write a ton of interesting stuff on these players as well. I have subscribed. I would urge everybody else to go and subscribe too. Awesome. Where else is your stuff, Matt? Where's your hit the Twitter link, where else you get your stuff?
Matt Harmon _BYB. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to as well. Plus everything I'm doing over at Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. We're down to 1 show a week, thank God. But we'll be back to 5 shows a week before you know it. And Football 301 with Nate Tice over at Yahoo as well.
Nice. Steve will be back in our next show. It'll be going out Monday. I think we're going to pre-record it tomorrow, so that everybody has Memorial Day off. Less so us, but more our producers who shouldn't be working on the holidays. So Steve will be back where we'll have more stories on maybe food that we've consumed over that period of time. The Mustang is up and running, so we've got that working in our favor as well. But Matt, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next week.